Welcome to Leader You by Black River Performance Management, where we believe work should fuel the human spirit, not drain it. In this leadership podcast, we will dive into the lived experiences of people flourishing in today's workplace and beyond. Join us to hear real-life examples of experiences from our own lives and from the leaders we know. Thank you for listening to the Leader You podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing a friend of mine, Jeremy Graves from Boise State University. Dr. Jeremy Graves ignites minds and empowers organizations to unlock the hidden potential of their multi-generational teams. As a director of professional and continuing education at Boise State University, he champions innovative programs that equip leaders with the tools to navigate the dynamic landscape of intergenerational collaboration. He's also a sought-after speaker, and he is the author of 3 acclaimed books, Leading Across Generations, The Leader Paradox, and his newest book is Change Leadership, which comes out here in 2024, just last week, where he dissects the complexities of organizational transformation and provides actionable strategies for success. Jeremy's passion lies in bridging generational divides and cultivating vibrant work environments where diverse perspectives collide to spark innovation. He draws upon his extensive experience teaching leadership courses in the LEAD program, leading workshops across the globe, and consulting with organizations ranging from startups to Fortune 500s. His expertise in generational dynamics, team building, and cultural restructuring empowers organizations to achieve breakthrough results and unleash the synergy of intergenerational collaboration. Beyond his professional pursuits, Jeremy enjoys cheering on the Boise State Broncos, watching and catching a hockey game, go Steelheads, and spending quality time with his family in scenic Boise, Idaho. I am grateful to have Dr. Jeremy on the show today. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining us on the podcast today, Jeremy. I am excited to tap into your wisdom as it relates to wisdom across how we can lead different generations.
Awesome. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. So, can you kind of give a little bit of a background? Go ahead and start with your story as it relates to, what's your leadership journey looked like and how did you end up at Boise State and all of that?
Well, how much time do you have? That's the real question in all of it. I'll give you the abbreviated version. My leadership journey actually began when I was 18 years old. I worked at the Red Line Riverside here in Boise, and it was the first time that, I mean, I had other jobs previous to that, but it was the first time that I moved into a leadership role. I had this amazing leader. Her name was Sharon, and she invested in me as a young kid and encouraged me, and that leader inspired me to be something that I didn't know I could be, which turned out to be such an amazing point in my life that allowed me to grow into the person I am today. I mean, I literally wrote about her in one of my books. Like, there's a whole section about how she influenced me. But from there, I started finding myself in leadership positions. It wasn't that I naturally came into an organization and said I want to be a leader, but I moved on to Micron after there, and found myself moving into a leadership position. And then I was in ministry for a while and found myself in leadership positions there, and then um, ended up in housing, and that's kind of what led me to the university. So I worked as the executive director for a couple of different shelters, one in Atlanta, and then one here in Boise. And started doing some work with Boise State and partnered with them on a couple of projects where they were doing research for us. And then 10 years ago, that opened the door for me to come on staff in a at the university as a initially I was a lead facilitator, so my role was actually to teach classes. And from there I went into instructional design, and then 6 years ago I moved into the director of professional and continuing education at the university. And so that's the real abbreviated version. I swear to you, there's a whole bunch more that we could talk about, but it was Sharon at 18 who shaped what I thought about leadership. And then I just kept finding myself in those leadership roles. And I have to say that I really love it.
Mhm.
It's hard. And there are times when I go, do I really love it as much as I say and I write about in those things? But then truthfully, I really do love being in leadership positions because I love people.
Yeah.
And I want to see people grow and be successful. And I think that's what I've learned along this whole, whole leadership journey.
Yes, I remember reading in your books about Sharon, and I wonder, I think, is she the first person who pointed out to you that you were a yes man or people pleaser?
Yep, yep, she was the one.
That's what I thought. Yeah,
At 18, she noticed that in me.
yeah. And how did she share with you? How did she give you that feedback?
So she actually pulled me aside and
Mhm,
we had this conversation and I remember it. I remember like everything that she talked about because she said, "You're really quick to jump in, and well, that's a real positive. Um, if you don't figure out how to set some boundaries, you're going to end up burning yourself out." And she said, "You're young and you have a lot of energy, but you won't always be young and you won't always have a lot of energy."
what a wise woman. Right.
And so right? So
Yeah.
she challenged me to think about that. And here's the interesting thing, Angie, if you look back on my life at 40 years old, I actually went into a counseling center
Mhm,
to do some personal work on some things that were going on within me. And it was almost verbatim. My counselor kind of reiterated what Sharon had told me all those years before
mhm,
about yes and no. And what I came out of that counseling center with was a free yes leads to or a free no, excuse me, leads to a free yes. And
mhm,
so when I say no to something that I don't want to necessarily do, I can say yes to the things that I want to do.
mm.
And for me, that's been a big part of the journey. So from 18 to 40, I kind of did it, and then at 40, I had to have a reset. And now I'll be 50 this next month, and hopefully, I'm still learning how to say no the right way.
Yeah, I love that. I'm a recovering people pleaser myself, so I resonated with your books, and I'm also highly altruistic and selfless on my drivers.
So am I. Those are my top two.
Yeah, so that does lead. So guess what? You make a perfect nonprofit worker too. That's what I've learned.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Well, and those are also the people who burn out in nonprofit work.
They are. And so I wanna bring this up because it's a good thing to be altruistic, it's a good thing to be selfless, it's a good thing to be people-y, but we have to know our overextensions, right?
Yep. Yeah. And not only know those overextensions, be aware of them and I say it this way, I have to be able to put some boundaries in my life, some guardrails that allow me to know when I need to step back and say, I got to take care of me as well in this process.
Yeah. So how do you when somebody asks you to do something, they want you to be on their board or they want you to present or there's something that comes up and it's something you actually do wanna do, but it's probably not the right timing, how do you address that?
Well, first off, I always just give them a really big number if I don't want to do it. If they say, "Hey, do you want to do this?" I say, "Yeah, I'll do it for $1 million," and then they usually laugh, and I go, "No, actually, I just don't have the time to do it right now."
Mhm.
But if it's something that I want to do, and I just know the timing's not right, I honestly just think having a conversation,
Mhm.
and I like to check in with myself. And I check in with myself by a couple different ways. So one of the ways I do that is I will pull up my calendar and I
Mhm.
will actually look at a week or a 2 week or a month, and I'll just say, how much free time do I even have on there now? Now, if I added this to my life, what does that do to my calendar?
Yeah.
And then the second way I check in, honestly, is with my spouse.
Yeah.
I'll just have a conversation with her about kind of where I'm at and hey, I'm interested in this. Like I just had a nonprofit that I really love in the community asked me if I would sit on their board. And I actually said no. And part
Mhm.
of the way I did was I checked in with myself, I checked in with my spouse, and then I went and took the executive director to lunch and just said, timing is really important. And if I want to be a part of an organization where I want to really give back in a meaningful way, then I have to be fully present. And I just don't feel like right now I'd be fully present, which isn't fair to you or to me.
That's so
And
good.
she understood, and
Yeah.
it was a good conversation. She
Yeah.
did say that she would talk to me next year and see if I was
I'm sure she'll keep
available.
checking back. Yeah. And it's so true though. It's a scary conversation to have if you've never had that conversation, but it's so impactful. And I love that you check in with your wife. That's what I do too. My husband is like, let's talk about your plate, Angie.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Let's talk about it. How many more plates can you hold up? And are you going
yeah.
to do these things well if you keep saying yes
Right.
to things? And I do have that giver's heart mindset. So I have to really ask myself, is this a hell yes? or,
Yeah.
and if I'm doing it because I want to please other people or because I don't want them angry at me, that's not a good enough reason. It really has to be because I really do want to do this. And then I know if I say yes to this, though, I have to say no to other things.
Yeah.
Those free yes and no tickets. I love that.
Yeah, yeah. That only cost me $22,000 in counseling, just in case you're wondering. So I'm going to save everybody
Thank
listening
you.
$22,000 a free no lead to a free
Yeah, you're
yes.
welcome. Thank you for
Yeah.
listening to the Leader You podcast, right? Yeah.
Uh,
So let's get into the question that I get often with leading across generations. Your book is incredible. It's something I'd like to recommend to all my clients because it's understanding human behavior as well as generational gaps
mhm.
and differences. But how do we collaborate intergenerationally to make our workplaces a place that fuels the human spirit and doesn't suck the life out of us?
What a great question. We could spend the entire rest of the podcast just talking about that one question. I think that so for me this is personal and it's passion.
Mhm,
So it's personal because for me when I started researching this. So this was my doctoral dissertation. This
mhm,
work that I did around leading across generations. It's personal to me because I was leading a nonprofit at the time, and the nonprofit had two different groups of people. I had a group of 18, 19, 20-year olds who were frontline employees who wanted to save the world and were doing great things. They were probably very selfless and altruistic. Another
mhm,
conversation. And then I had a board of directors who were many either near retirement or in retirement. They were giving back to the community, business leaders, a lot of them successful business leaders, and I couldn't get the two worlds to talk.
mhm.
So initially, my doctoral dissertation was out of complete desperation. It was
That's awesome.
like, I do not know how to get these two uh, groups of people to actually have a conversation, a meaningful conversation. I mean, they had small talk, but a
Yeah,
meaningful conversation, and to collaborate on projects because I needed the board to understand what the front line did. I needed the front line to understand the board, and so that was where it all started for me. And
yeah.
what I did was I started doing focus groups. I started to try to understand what were defining moments, how those defining moments shaped a generation. And then from there I went into, so then how do we work together? Because
Mhm,
it's one thing to know our differences, but it's another thing to actually do something with those differences and
mhm,
actually move towards collaboration
mhm,
and finding ways to collaborate and finding ways that are going to be meaningful and impact and move the needle in your organization
mhm,
in many ways. And so for me, it was all built around collaboration. So there was a model that I used in my doctoral work called CORE,
mhm,
which stood for how collaborative are you as an organization, how clear are your organizational values, how do you raise up people, and how do you empower people. That's where the CORE came from.
mhm,
And so I looked at how generations show up in the workplace based on generational characteristics based on defining moments that shaped them. But then I said, okay, now that we know that, how do we actually collaborate?
mhm,
And so I spent a lot of time looking at how do we collaborate? What does it look like? So, for instance, here's a great example: boomers and millennials tend to work very similar to one another.
mhm,
Boomers grew up in a time when there was a lot of conversation around having to share because there were so many boomers
mhm.
that there wasn't enough, materials in classrooms. They were the first generation that actually got graded shares well with others. Like that was a
Yeah,
part of the report card,
right.
the boomers. And then millennials have grown up being very collaborative. They collaborate on projects. I mean, I remember I have a son who's right in the age between in late millennial or early Gen Z, kind of depending on the dates.
Yeah.
He's the cusper, and I remember one day he was working on homework when he was in high school, and I was like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm working on this Google Doc," and I'm like, "A Google what?" And he opened, and I was like, "How do you get anything done? There's like 5 people on there, all moving things around." And I now know about Google Docs, just so you're all aware. But but they grew up collaborating. They grew up working on projects together, and so I found right away that in the workplace, boomers and millennials actually collaborate well together.
Yeah.
So it's finding out those different the ways that we see the world, and
Mhm.
then leveraging that to say, how do we actually collaborate and work together?
Yeah, and how do we gain the wisdom from the older people that have been in the organization more senior and have a little bit more experience, and then the fresh eyes of those younger people that could see a new way and a better path forward.
Yeah, and that's the best part is recognizing that you've got context with folks that have been in the organization, right? They understand. Sometimes it's industry knowledge, sometimes it's the context, sometimes it's, hey, we tried this, 15 years ago and it didn't work. It doesn't mean it won't work now, but
Mhm,
here's why it didn't work 15 years ago.
mhm,
With the younger generation that goes, yeah, but that was 15 years ago. We could probably do this. And
mhm.
if you can get those folks working together, it's pretty powerful,
Yeah.
for both sides, because you've got context who helps you hold things in one side, and futuristic thinking that helps you hold it in the other side, and those two together, it's really powerful.
Yeah. So as you have been doing when you started your dissertation and all this research, what were some of the things that shocked you the most as you were coming across things?
I think, well, so I would say this first. When I first started doing research on this, so I'm old. When I first started doing research on this, there was hardly anybody talking about it.
Hmm.
Um, I found two books initially when I first started talking about this, and this was early 2000s.
Hmm.
Um, but so that was shocking to me that people weren't talking about it. And then the
Hmm.
people that were talking about it, I felt like they were not actually helping the conversation, they were hindering the
Yeah.
conversation. They were continuing to silo instead of build bridges. And
Hmm.
so, one of the things that I talk a lot about when I'm working with teams around this conversation is you have a choice every day to continue to silo and just gather around people who think just like you, or
Hmm.
you can build bridges across these generational divides
Hmm.
and actually start to build a stronger team in that process. So I think that was one of the things that got me. I think another thing that got me was looking at the fact that I tell people a lot, like, you are more than the sum of the years that you were born.
Hmm.
Like, we have a tendency to, like, lump people into, oh, you're a Gen Xer, or
Right.
you're a, a millennial, or whatever. And then the reality of it is, I do this fun thing when I work with teams where I have them take this quiz, and the quiz was actually built around a night at my house. So I had two traditionalists, two boomers, two Xers, two millennials, and two Gen Zs over to my house for dinner. This isn't a joke, by the way.
It
This is
sounds
like
like
this sounds
it.
like the
We all
beginning of a
walked into
joke,
a
right?
bar. Right.
And what I did was I said, I want to have a night where we just talk. So everybody put their phone away, which
Hmm.
was fantastic.
Yeah.
For the older generation, it was a little easier. Younger
Mm.
generation was a little harder. But we talked, and then I said, I want to write a quiz. I want to write a quiz that I can use when I'm working with teams. And so we came up with 8 questions. There, a lot of them are super funny,
Hmm.
but we do it, and then I say I'm going to put up their responses, and you put A, B, C, D, or E based on each of these 8 responses. And at the end, I have them count up how many A's do you have, how many B's, and then I say this is the generation you really are. And people get a good chuckle out of it because they go, "Oh, I'm a millennial, but it shows that I'm a boomer," or whatnot. And what that really shows us is that we're more than the sum of the years that we're born,
Hmm.
and that the worst thing we can do with the generational conversation is weaponize it
Hmm.
and make it about, oh, it's because you're that generation or you're this generation.
Hmm.
So when I was doing the research initially, I was shocked by the fact that really where I landed at the end of all the research was that we're more alike than we are different.
Hmm. For sure.
And that's the beauty of it
Yeah.
all, is that we're actually more alike than we are different.
Yeah, we're all humans trying to just get our needs met and live according to our values,
Exactly.
and at each stage of life, different things become more important to us, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that became a real, important piece to the whole conversation. I started to create these mentoring circles
Mhm.
around stages of life versus age or
Yeah.
when you were born, because if you really think about it, between the ages of 0 and 20, most of us are, we think our generation's a great generation, and, like, my 18-year-old rolls his eyes and tells me, "Dad, you're old school,"
Mhm.
which was his way of basically saying, "You don't get me."
Yeah.
But something happens between 20 and 40 where we start to kind of grow up a little bit, and we start to
Mhm.
think, "Man, maybe our parents knew a thing or two."
Mhm.
I was 21 years old when I sat down with my dad and said, "Hey, if I want to buy a house in the next 5 years, what do I need to do?" Right? Like, the 18-year-old Jeremy would have not asked his dad that question.
Right. Yeah.
Right? But then something happens between the ages of 40 and 62 where we start to like think about, is this really what we want life to be about? And 40 was when I ended up in a counseling center trying to, work through some things. And then 60 to 80 is where you spend a lot of time looking back saying, did I accomplish what I wanted to? So I started putting people together in mentoring circles of length of time they've been in their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Someone that's been there, 0 to 2 years, 4 to 10 years, 15 plus, and then nearing retirement
Mm-hmm.
or in retirement, and started working on projects in these mentoring circles. And that really actually moved the needle much more than saying, let's get a millennial, a boomer, a Gen X, or, let's get them
Yeah.
all together, because they could be all over the place when it comes to how long they've been in a job.
Yeah, and when we just label somebody, it doesn't mean they fit the mold in either,
Totally.
right? Like I could definitely Gen Z or Gen Xer, right? But that doesn't mean that I fall into all those categories. Like
Yeah, sure.
and same thing with a baby boomer. Like they or in any of them, it's like depends on what's going on in their life, their basic psychological needs, how they show up, their personality, their behaviors, how they handle their emotions, all of these things. We're super complex, and this is why I love having these conversations because
Yeah,
sometimes we think we just label somebody and put them in a box. Well, that just
exactly.
answers but it doesn't. It actually makes you, like you said, more silos and
Yep.
more of them versus us, and
Yeah.
and that is a problem, right?
And I used in my research methodology, I used appreciative inquiry as
Mhm.
part of that, which is finding the strengths and leveraging the strengths.
Yeah.
And so in my class, so I teach this class and I work with organizations around this, and I always start with, so what have you seen change in the workplace, right? And this is usually the chance for people to complain about a different generation, and I let them do it. I'm like, that's fine. And then I say, okay, for the rest of our time together, every time you tell me something you dislike about a certain generation, you have to turn around and tell me what the strength is.
Mhm.
Changes things totally in the conversation, because
Yes.
I think the strength based approach to looking at how we show up differently in the workplace is actually the key. Instead of saying, if you would be more like me, we would be successful, that does not actually move the needle in an organization. It continues to silo.
Mm-mm.
But if we start thinking about how can we leverage the strength that you bring to our team, that changes things significantly in
Yeah.
that process.
It works well with teenagers too, doesn't
It totally does.
it?
Yeah.
How could you do more of what I want you to do? That isn't gay, or even adult kid, it's just general relationships, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
The number of people who come up to me after a class and tell me, "This was a great class for my work, but it's also gonna help me as a parent."
Mhm, or a
It's
husband or
pretty
a wife, right?
exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that, and I really do think that the book is super easy to read, and anybody could take simple applications and start putting them into place. It would be a great team read,
Yeah.
on how so have you had teams read the book? And then if so, what were some of their follow-up? What are some of the ahas that those teams had? And
Yeah, so I have had teams read it. So I write in a very interesting and specific style. It's called airplane reads. People have probably heard of them or familiar with it, but the idea is I want to be able to hand it to you on a plane. And by the time you land, I want you to at least have an understanding of what it is that I believe about that topic. So
Mhm,
I've written 3 books. All of them are in that kind of vein, purposefully.
mhm,
And then I tell people like, hey, have your team read it. And if you want, I'll jump on a call with you and we can talk about it. And what I love is to hear. So some of the ahas that I
mhm,
get are, oh, we're actually more alike than than I thought, or oh, that was really helpful for me to understand that a boomer who was probably raised by a traditionalist who saw the world through a very hierarchical lens, that makes sense now to when we have these conversations and they get maybe a more authoritarian than I would like them to.
mhm.
Maybe that's part of their default. And oh, maybe what I could do is I could come in this way and have the conversation. Some
Right,
of the other aha moments that I've had are like, oh, the biggest thing we can do as a team is start talking with each other.
right.
I know it sounds like a shocking aha moment,
Wow.
but but it's really true. It's like, for me, I have found that when organizations will call and say, "Hey, would you come and work with our team? We have these generational issues." 99% of the time, they're not generational. I
Yes,
mean, they're
that's
really
true.
not.
That's true. Same thing. Yep.
They're, they're
They're
human.
human.
Yep.
They're
And
human.
their communication oftentimes
Yeah.
is where it really comes down to. And so those are fun though, because you can go in and help kind of unpack that myth. We like
Mm.
to blame it on a generational thing,
Yeah.
but it's not often as generational as we would like to make it. It's usually more that we're human,
Hmm.
and we're all inhabiting the same planet, trying to figure out how to interact and work together.
And we're still trying to be better communicators and still managing our emotions and all of those things. And so
Yeah.
it really does come down to that. That's why I think it's helpful to have more perspective. And so that's what I feel like your book does is gives perspective. And even the cover is like a gap, like a big divide
Yeah.
and a bridge, right? Like to get to the other side. And
Yeah.
so if we can get people to get to that mindset of maybe there's something that I can do instead of blaming everybody else that they're not doing this. And if they just did that, blah, blah.
Yeah.
If I said, what could I do differently for this team? How could I approach this? What could I do? What could our team do? What are you guys willing to do? Let's read this. Let's think about some ways that we could become more collaborative versus, like you said, in these silos, because there's nothing good that comes out of silos. And blaming other people, just it's a race to the bottom. Thank you for joining us on the Leader U podcast, sponsored by Black River Performance Management. Leader U is an important part of Black River's initiative to bring high quality leadership development and organizational performance improvement solutions. Leader U is one of our initiatives that features different speakers whom provide their expertise and perspectives on a variety of workplace topics. I invite you to visit our webpage at www.blackriverpm.com. That is www.blackriver, the letter P as in performance, and the letter M as in management. We offer a wide range of services from training to performance improvement, coaching, retreats, and group facilitation and strategic planning. Our focus is to assist people in better understanding how to lead effectively and impactfully through a variety of evidence-based tools and practices.
Yeah. There are two things when you're talking, Angie, that came to my mind. One was I often tell people in organizations that you have a choice. You can be a scalpel or a Swiss Army knife.
Mm.
And the scalpel approach is if you'll just be more like me, everything will be okay. And the Swiss Army knife is we're all different. And so I'm going to interact with you differently. And it may not have anything to do with a generation. It may just be because you're different and I'm different. And so I use that analogy, but here's the crazy thing. So I use that analogy, and a lot of people will tell me, "That was a great takeaway. I want to be more of a Swiss Army knife." I was sitting at a hockey game. I'm a big hockey fan. I was sitting at a hockey game uh, last year, and I ended up sitting next to a guy who is the head of surgery for Pennsylvania, a huge hospital in Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
And I was telling him we were talking, and I was telling him about the book, and he called me a couple weeks later. I got his number because he's got tickets on the glass, and I wanted to go see a game. That was the whole reason I got his number. Let's be honest with you. However, he did ask if I would send him my books, and so I sent him my books. And a few weeks later, he called me and he said, "I want to order one of your books for my entire surgery staff,
Mm.
and I want to read it, and I want to have you have a conversation." Because he goes, I have 4 out of 5 generations all working on our team.
Mhm.
And he said, what I liked about your book was that it was a great tool that we can use.
Mhm.
And so he bought one for his entire team, and then I jumped on a Zoom call with him, and we just chatted about the book and some takeaways that they had and some ways that they could put it into practice. But I used the scalpel slide with them because I knew that they would get the difference between a scalpel and the Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, and I love
So
that.
it was super fun.
You know, my background being in surgery, I think that's really funny
Exactly.
too. And I was thinking maybe the scalpel was gonna have more precision. So I was thinking of it opposite as I was thinking a scalpel would be more of a precise way to take something out or something, but than using a Swiss Army knife. But if you're thinking of it in the other context,
Yeah,
context matters, right? And
exactly.
so so anyways, I love that. I love that. I do think it is something that we have to be able to educate ourselves on and recognize when we are being ageist. There is
Yeah, absolutely.
ageism is a real
Yep.
threat that still is in the workplace. And we have to be careful about saying that older people can't do this and younger people are worthless, getting into that place.
Hmm.
It's usually something else that's going on in their life, that's making them be a low performer. In the
Hmm.
experience I've had, there's usually
100%. 100%.
something
I
else
agree with
going
you.
on.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not a generational thing. It's something that's going on in their basic psychological needs. They're overwhelmed. They don't have the tools. There's some other reason. We got to get to the root cause, not just slap a band-aid on it or a label and tell them they're lazy or they're not getting their work done,
Yeah.
and really have some actual interventions that will help move the needle, right?
Yeah. And I worked with a team one time where I kept hearing people say, well, it's because they don't have the same work ethic. And they said it like 3 times, like different people around the room. And so I finally was like, I just stopped the meeting and I said, here's what I want you to do at your table. I want you to define work ethic. So I had every table define work ethic, and then I had them read it out loud, and then I said, so who's right?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is the problem. This is how we continue to silo, is we say, well, if they would just work more like me,
Like me.
right? They just work more like me because this is the right way to work. I mean, I know how to show up and work, and they don't work like I do. And in what I found in that is there's a couple things. Sometimes there is a desire, and it's a people pleaser or whatever else it might be. That's why they show up at 6 when work starts at 8, and that's why they stay late because they got other things that they're trying to prove
Mm-hmm.
or work through in their own mind. And then you've got people who show up at 8 and leave at 5, and they're just not as committed. Well, no, they maybe have better boundaries than some of the rest of us,
And they may be more efficient
Exactly.
too. Sometimes
Right.
they're more efficient and quicker at their work.
Totally,
They're better at
100%.
it.
And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's not it's just an interesting conversation that you start to have when you
Yeah.
look at the idea of it through the lens of our well, if you'd work more like me type of thing. And so that work ethic conversation is one that I hear a lot. Is that
Mhm.
they just don't have the same work ethic. And so that conversation about ageism and being ageist is so important
Mhm.
because it's very easy to weaponize, like I said, this whole conversation and just start pointing out that we're right and they're wrong. And in many ways, there are so many other things that we should be looking at. I
Mhm.
love what you said. What's going on underneath the surface? Where's the stress in your life? What are the tensions that you might be? One of the things that I found was there was an organization I was working with, and there was people that were complaining about this person wasn't doing their job and everything. Well, it turned out that person hadn't actually been trained. There was no
Right.
training that
Yeah.
had gone on.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this person is literally watching others to try to figure out what their job is.
Mhm.
And so when that was uncovered, I was like, that changes everything, doesn't it? And the manager actually was like, I feel very badly
Mhm.
that we've been thinking it's this, and it was really that we actually didn't take the time to train them.
Yeah, I've seen that multiple times. They've
Yeah.
just been given the keys and they're just like, call
Yeah.
me if you have a problem," which is not exactly you don't even know this team yet. You don't know the culture. You don't know your psychological safety. Like to just speak up and be like, I don't know what I'm doing. You don't also want to make them feel like they did a bad hire or whatever. You want to feel
Right.
competent in your job. And so putting somebody in that position isn't fair to them. It's not fair to,
Yeah.
and they're not going to succeed as well as they could if they had a proper onboarding.
Yeah. Every generation wants to be seen as competent. I promise you.
Yes.
Because every person wants to be seen as competent.
And every generation wants respect, not just boomers.
Exactly. Yep. That's 100% true. Yeah.
Yes. We all want to be respected, treated well, and we want to be competent in our jobs, regardless of what you've been told. If
Exactly.
that's the big nugget today, right?
There you go. That's it. Take that away.
Take that away. So, okay, so say somebody has a team with 5 people on that generation, or five different generations
Generations. Huh?
represented. What would be some good talking points in the book? Just a few things that you've kind of really nailed down for them to really consider.
So I think one of the things that I would have them talk about is what does collaboration look like for you?
Mhm.
I think that's just a really great conversation to have because you're not you're not making it generational, you're making it personal.
Mhm.
Um, and then one of the things that you will probably see if you ask that question is that we are more alike than we are different,
Mhm.
and that when when you would expect an older generation to respond one way, they may not because they're human beings. They're not
Mhm.
just a person from that generation. So, what does collaboration look like to you? But the other thing that it does is it actually helps you unpack what collaboration looks like for your team,
Mhm.
so you know how to actually collaborate better.
Mhm.
So I would always start there with a team. What does collaboration look like? I also would have a conversation around objectives or organizational values,
Mhm.
and what is it that how clear are the objectives of my job and what I'm supposed to do, and what does that mean to you versus what does it mean to me? A great example of this is I was working with a team, and I had 5 generations stand up in front, one person from each generation, and I asked the question, "Work starts at 8. What time do you show up?" And it was a really fascinating conversation because you could probably see where some people might fall. Well, work starts at 8, I show up at 7, these
Mhm.
kind of things. But there was someone who said, well, if work starts at 8, I show up at 7:59 and I clock in. And someone got really upset. One of the people up front got visibly upset. And I stopped and I said, well, why is that upsetting to you? And the person said, it's fine that he's there at 7:59 and he clocks in, but we work in a massive manufacturing plant. And if you get there at 7:59 and clock in, you are not at your machine until 8:10 or 8:15 by the time you get your smocks on and walk across the plant. And he said, so in my mind, you're late. And I said, has anyone ever told you this, to the person who had said
Mm.
7:59? And he said, no, no one's ever told me that. That I just thought I had to be clocked in by 8. Such an interesting conversation, right?
Right. Yeah.
Around, like, oh, well, if work starts at this time, well, having conversations. So if you got 5 generations working together, sometimes just have a conversation,
Yeah.
sit down and talk to each other.
Mhm.
How clear are the objectives of what we're supposed to do, what time we're supposed to be there, what does that look like? I know with our team at the university, one of the things I did was we talked about how long should we how quickly should we respond to emails? Like,
Mhm.
we talked about that as a team,
Yeah.
right? And what is the time for us? Well, we decided that 24 hours was doable
Mhm.
unless it's a holiday or weekend, right?
Mhm.
So we had that conversation, so we had those clear objectives. So I think having conversations around collaboration and objectives are really important.
Oh, I think a lot of other higher ed people should take your lead.
Well, that's a whole other conversation, isn't
Yeah. So speaking of which, let's go down the higher ed road because I think you're
it?
working on another book maybe that has a little bit to do with some of the things that are going on in higher ed. Is there anything that you could kind of give your wisdom as to how that needs to change to be more impactful and effective?
Well, I have to be careful what I say here, you
Yes.
know that.
Yes. I mean the politically correct thing to say, of course.
Uh, so the book that you're referring to is called Change Leadership. It just came out last week, actually.
Oh, wow.
So super excited about that. And what I'm looking at there is I'm looking at the difference between change management and change leadership.
Mhm.
And I believe both are important. So I don't want anyone to hear me say that I'm anti-change management.
Mhm.
I think change management is great. I think organizations need it. I think our universities need it.
Mhm.
I don't want to do it. I don't want to do change management because
Mhm.
that's writing emails and having stakeholder meetings and making sure everybody understands the change, and then actually executing the change. I actually want to equip leaders to lead their teams in the midst of change. And so that's the difference in change management and change leadership in my mind. I look
Okay.
at change management as a way that the organization can roll out the change, but change leadership is about how the leaders lead their teams through the change. And so the book is really geared at giving teams tools
Mhm.
that they can use to navigate the change, knowing where people are with the change, talking about how language matters when you talk about change.
Mhm.
The words that we use when we talk about change can be triggering to some people and not to
Scary,
others.
for sure.
And
Yeah.
so, how do we ensure that when we use a word like transition or realignment, that we use it in a way that is helpful for people rather than just automatically triggering them?
Mhm.
And so, the premise of the book is I really want to see organizations have the tools necessary to lead their teams. That's why I called it change leadership. I want them to have the tools to lead their team effectively
Mhm.
in that, and whether that is within higher ed, which I think we need to look at and say, is what we're doing working?
Mhm.
How can we change? If anyone who's listening understands or works in higher ed or knows higher ed, it's a slow process to make a change.
For sure.
Um,
Big
I,
chip.
Yeah, I'm a guy who likes to get things done. Like,
Mm,
let's make the change, let's move forward. And I've had to learn in higher ed that I need to give people a chance not only to process the change, but I also then need to do a lot of research on how this change might impact this change and this change and this change and this
mm,
situation. And then who do I need to talk to? Do I need to go up to my
mhm,
boss and beyond, or what does that look like in that
mhm,
process? So there's a lot to it. I'm really, really happy and proud of the book. It's when I finished, it's my third book, and when I finished reading the author's draft in my office, I started crying
Aw,
because I was like, "This is everything I've ever wanted to say about change leadership."
I
Um,
can't wait to read it. I didn't know it came out this week. We should have.
Yeah,
Well,
it just came out
let's
like
see it.
this week right there. So
Oh my goodness. Yes.
yeah.
I need a copy of that. I'll be over in Boise next week for some
Oh well,
work. So I'm
I'll definitely get you one for
yeah,
sure.
that would be awesome. And we'll put it in the show notes. Is it available on Amazon?
It is, yeah. It's available on Amazon.
So the topics of your three books are the leader paradox.
Yeah, so the first book that came out was Leading Across Generations. That was my doctoral
Yeah.
dissertation. That was
Mm,
2018, rewrite in 2023. The Leader Paradox came out in
mhm.
2023, which is on servant leadership
Love that
and
one too. That's
kind
a
of
great.
looking through the 7 pillars of servant leaders. And then, and that also had a bit of a rebrand and a redesign with Aloha. And then this one came out on Aloha in just last week,
Yay.
2024.
I am so excited, and I'm sorry that I didn't even know that. That is so
Oh, it's
exciting.
totally good.
But now we have 3 books to recommend, and I can't wait to read it and write you a review on it. I love that you're putting this work out there. Um, we're almost at the end of the time, so I wanna ask you a couple questions that I usually ask at the end. And
Yeah,
first,
perfect.
um, what's some of the worst leadership advice you've ever gotten?
Oh, the worst leadership advice I've ever gotten. Uh, just we're gonna use the rip the band-aid off approach. That's probably been some of the worst leadership advice I've ever gotten, which is we're just going to do it no matter what they say. They'll get over it. We'll move on.
Mhm,
Um, never works the way that you you think it's going to work, or they'll understand. They'll get over it.
mhm.
Approach to leadership. Just it doesn't work.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, that's really good. What about the best advice you've ever gotten?
People over process.
Mm,
It's simple, I know, but ensuring that you are investing in the people. When you invest in the people well, the process will follow. But if you try to flip that and make it about the process and try to push the people into the process, there's a lot of pushback to
yeah.
that because people want to be seen as individuals and known,
Mhm.
and not simply just a number in an organization.
Yeah, that's so good. Such good nuggets there. What about if you were able to talk to your younger self, maybe when you're just into the working, just coming into the work environment, like 18 to 20, when you met Sharon, what is something that you wish you could tell yourself at that younger age?
uh, I wish I could tell myself that the imposter syndrome doesn't ever go away. It just gets easier to navigate in the sense of you start to trust yourself more.
Mhm.
As a 18, 19, 20-year-old, I mean, as a 19-year-old at the Red Lion, I was leading people 3 times my age
Mhm.
um, on teams, and I suffered from pretty severe imposter syndrome that I didn't think I should be leading or could do it. And I always thought at 18, 19, 20 that that would go away.
Mhm.
And like I said, I'm 49. I'll be 50 next month. I was standing in a room 6 months ago, and I said to myself, "What am I doing here?"
Mhm.
And that voice in my head, that imposter syndrome voice, it's quieter now, but
Mhm.
it's still there, but it's partly because I trust myself now. The 20-year-old didn't trust himself as much and maybe had more to prove, and at 50 I'm more like, this is who I am. I hope people like it, but if they don't, I can't make people.
Mhm. That's so good. You're here to serve. It's an offering.
Yeah.
And I know you as a person, and I really do think you're a servant leader. And that is what you're there to do, is to show up and to serve. It's not to please everybody or make sure that everybody likes it, because they just won't.
Yeah.
right? But there's somebody there that is going to like it. And if I may, this is something that's helped me with imposter syndrome too, is
Yeah.
thinking about myself as more of an explorer than an imposter.
Love
An
it.
explorer is okay at navigating new things and expects to fail, expects to mess up. Like, I'm in a new place because I'm trying new things, and that is exploring. And it's okay where and so it's okay to make these mistakes or to not know everything. And I think if we change our mindset,
Love that.
yeah, if we change, it's not mine. It's something that I learned just a couple weeks ago reading a blog, and I'm like, yeah, an explorer mindset versus an imposter mindset is just like, it's okay to make mistakes. I don't know all this. This is my first time, and the more I do something new, the more uncomfortable it's going to feel. And I would say public speaking is one of those things. It's if you've taught and you've when you teach, you can hide behind your knowledge. But for me, getting out there and speaking about my story and my life, that
Yeah.
requires a lot more vulnerability. And so when I get into this space of feeling like an imposter, or who am I, what am I doing, I think you're an explorer. You're exploring these things, and it's okay to be an explorer and to not be great at it, and so for me, that's helped me. I don't know if it will help
That's-
you or the listeners.
I think it's fantastic. And so first off, I'm glad I got out of bed this morning because I learned something today, and that's a huge thing for me. It really is.
Yeah.
I want to try to learn something every day. So thank you for that. And I'm going to start to try to change my vocabulary around that because I
Right.
think that's a beautiful way of expressing it. And secondly, um, I will say that I've had the opportunity to hear you speak, and you are a fantastic public speaker, and especially when you tie your story into it. What you shared at our leadership summit was incredibly powerful, and incredibly vulnerable. I was super proud to call you a friend that day because it was like I know that you stepped out into some scary spaces
Muddy
and
water.
and explored.
Yeah, explored.
But it was such a powerful just expression of who you are, and it aligns with your values of what you say that you are. So what's beautiful is you read things on your website and you go, is that really true? And then you watch what you did and you go, yep, that's who Angie is. That was beautiful.
I appreciate that. I'm so glad I get to talk to people that, inspire me and inspire my listeners and this is an offering, and you've
Yeah.
given so much wisdom. I hope that people will get your book and read it with their teams. I hope that they will ask you to speak at their events because you do speaking, you do, and you also work through the Boise State Learning and it's learning and development, right?
Yeah,
Program.
PACE, professional and continuing education.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's part of the L&D of the university. It's part of our give back to the community in the sense of we have a lot of subject matter experts who find themselves within the walls of academia who get to give back to the community as well. So it's a beautiful thing.
It is. Well, thank you for putting on such an amazing conference this year, too. I loved the speakers that you had, and I was just grateful to be a part of it. So I'm grateful for you sharing your wisdom with our listeners, and I'm just blessed to have you as a friend.
Thanks, Angie. I feel the exact same about you.
Awesome. And thank you for listening to the Leader You podcast. If you found this podcast to be helpful, please share it with your network and share it with someone you love. We love you, and we hope to expand this podcast, so continue to share it. Thank you.